Welcome on into the Fantasy Football Forge. My name's Steve, and today we are going to look at the Las Vegas lines and what they're telling us for the running backs, and then we'll run through the tight ends in terms of who we might be drafting a little too high or a little too low. That is the main goal of these videos. Previously released a video on the wide receivers and the quarterbacks. I think that video is going to be better than this video is, because when we look at the running backs, there is a slight issue here with the data I was able to get from DraftKings and a different sports book in terms of I don't have really any receiving data. There was not enough receiving data for enough of these players to go off of. So really what we're looking at in this video is going to be the rushing floor, which of course comes with a bit of a ceiling as well for rushing touchdowns. But that's what the ultimate number is. Now this is, once again, just like in the other video, a 7-point system. So 4 points is going to be represented by the white colors, and then 1 point, 7 points for those two that I just highlighted on the extremes of a good betting odds or poor betting odds. So I'm going to give a little bit of my opinion, but for the most part, especially for the running backs here, going to try to stick to what Vegas is saying. But I did include 2024, the top 25 2024 targets leaders in this over here. So that's going to help us to push a few guys maybe up and just give some more context to kind of their tiers and whatnot, because that's kind of how we're going to go through these, is the tiers of the scoring. So with that out of the way, well, let me explain this. So over here is the overall ADP. Here is the average ADP, I believe, within the position. Within the position. Here is the betting odds for the rushing yards for 1,000 or more yards. Here is the betting odds betting odds for rushing touchdowns of 5+. Just have a few guys with those because not every running back had odds for rushing touchdowns of 10+, 10 or more rushing touchdowns, I should say. And then here's the final score. So how I did this is I just halved the rushing touchdowns of 5+ in terms of the points that were awarded. So it's on a 3.5 point scale instead of the 7-point scale. That's all that I did there. As I was about to say, Tuesdays, Thursdays, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Come on in. We're doing live mock drafts. We've almost got a full room. We could do an 8-team league. So that's great to see, because last year we never quite got there. So it's been a good crew. I hope to see you as well to come on in. We're getting random faces here and there in there as well. And if you are interested in joining another league, come join us on this upcoming Tuesday, the first Tuesday of August, next Tuesday, depending on exactly when you're watching this video, and show up, because we're going to try to set up a league at that point in time before we mock draft that day. So let's get on into this. And the good news for Saquon Barkley, at least, is, hey, look at that. He's up at the top, 14 points, the maximum that you can get here. Same with Derrick Henry. Obviously, this is not taking in the receiving numbers into account. However, neither of them were top 25 receiving numbers, and that opens the door for maybe some guys below them to creep up into this same tier. But especially half PPR, I look at Derrick Henry and I say, are we underdrafting him? I don't know for sure that we're necessarily underdrafting him, but we might be a little bit overly concerned about those receiving numbers for him, given the, these touchdown odds that he has, and also a solid, safe rushing total. And you can compare that to Saquon Barkley, and there's so many yellow, red flags, especially once we get here to the next two guys, which I have in a tier once we count the receptions for half PPR and full PPR included within these two. Because after last year, the chances of Saquon Barkley having an injury, essentially not producing the same types of numbers, are quite high historically. You don't want to project an injury ever, but it is something to keep in mind, especially if you're at the 1-1. I would go Jamar Chase instead of him. Nonetheless, our next two guys here are at the top of this next tier, but we're going to separate them because they were 4th and 7th respectively for Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs in total targets last year across the entirety of the season. And that's what this is, a total targets number, not a targets per game number, which I would have preferred, but total targets was easier to get and bring on over here. So for these two, the rushing floor, not quite as high, but obviously both really good target getters. Going to repeat that process again this year. And so I consider them half PPR, full PPR in this same tier. But when we look at this next tier here, getting 12 points and 11 points, we also see Josh Jacobs, Jonathan Taylor, Kyren Williams, James Cook, Christian McCaffrey, and Bucky Irving in that tier. The guys who I think are the guys who are standing out via the ADP, the overall ADP is what I really looked at for this. Those are the players who I've highlighted in this light purpley color, and then I have one highlighted in light green, which I forgot exactly why. I think it was just because it's a less extreme, but whatever. When we look at Kyren Williams, James Cook, we see two guys who, out of this tier and the tier above it, are being taken, well, really, we just care about this tier, are being taken drastically behind everyone else. So they present a potential, according to Vegas at the very least, potential value. And I will say that I'm pretty much in line, in agreement there. There's obviously some concerns that we have subjectively, but Vegas is, not so concerned about it, about some of those concerns that we have. And then we've got Christian McCaffrey down here going at 11. And I think, in terms of where he is on this list, you just have to remember that Christian McCaffrey is Christian McCaffrey. We don't have target numbers from last year, but obviously he's a very good in the receiving department. And one other thing I want to point out is this chart is, of course, first sorted by rushing floor, but the second assorted is the overall ADP. So they are in the order of where they're being drafted here. That just allows us to better find the guys we might be overdrafting or underdrafting in each tier. Other than that, Bucky Irving still makes it into this tier, so that's a little bit comforting. He's somebody who I am just not dying to draft, but he's one of those guys where if he were to fall to me at a certain point, of course I'm still going to draft him, and I just won't feel the best about it. Travis Etienne last year for my team, DJ Moore last year for one of my teams. A lot of times those players don't go so well for me, but I do it nonetheless every time. Trust my board. Now, when we look at this next tier, it starts off with Ashton Jeanty, in the third tier here, followed by Devon Achane, Breece Hall, Chuba Hubbard, and James Conner. Now, I do have this little tier right here kind of suggesting that these two could be pushed up, but really this little tier break here is for Devon Achane. It's just that Ashton Jeanty's ahead of him, technically speaking. Now, what I want to say is Ashton Jeanty's a rookie. We don't really have any previous target leading numbers for him from last season, but I do think that we could probably push him up to the next tier because he is a good receiving back. He does have that skill set. Now, if you go back and you look at his college numbers from last year at Boise State, he did not get a lot of targets. They were just running the ball all the time. But you look at the year before that, and he has some pretty solid receiving numbers. And once again, when you look at his tape as a receiver, he's a good receiving back. Now, for Devon Achane, we're looking at a guy who was the second most target-leading running back in the league last season throughout the entirety of the year. That obviously, if we had that in this data, would bump him up quite potentially significantly. I have actually moved Devon Achane up ahead of Ashton Jeanty in my running back rankings, interestingly enough, due to this exercise in part, and mostly. So Ashton Jeanty, a little bit of a yellow flag going on for him. That's going to bring us on to Breece Hall, who is the third most target-getting leader from 2024. I gotta word that better. And he's also kind of fallen in between in the middle of this tier. Now, is he going to have as many targets as he did last year? That's a little bit tougher to say for sure because it is going to be a less pass-happy attack. There will be fewer targets to be going around, but he's still probably the second most targeted player on this offense as well. So, to some extent, there's still a nice receiving floor for him, which just raises his whole game. But it is nice to see he's not too low here in terms of Vegas's expectations for him as well. And I have fairly high expectations of him, and I know he himself is taking it very seriously and seems to be very level-headed about his situation. He understands that he is not the chosen running back of the current staff that is now in control in New York. He's not expecting them to, cut a deal with him. He's expecting to go out to prove himself and probably be out on the open market next year unless the team manages to get something locked up. But, Breece Hall seems to have a straight head on him about everything. I appreciate that, and he knows that this is his make-or-break season, and he's got so much talent, definitely derailed by some injury. That's further in the past, too, still pretty young. So I'm very hopeful for Bryce Young and a slight value potential, but interestingly enough here, and I don't think surprisingly given the main numbers that we're looking at for the rushing floors, is that Chuba Hubbard and James Conner are in this same tier as Devon Achane, even though they're totally different kinds of players, and some different expectations, especially in Carolina, in terms of him not quite having the same workload that he had last year. Nonetheless, for where you can get them, quite potentially values in this draft, and that happens every year with James Conner. And what I will say on top of that is you look here, and both of them actually did have quite a few targets last season. Once again, Chuba, expect that to take a slight step back, but he's a good receiving back. And James Conner, don't know if that's going to take a step back. It was a good receiving year for him. Let's bring us on to this next tier. We'll make sure that I don't get in the way of it. And this tier has Chase Brown, Kenneth Walker, and David Montgomery in it. Is Chase Brown being a little bit overdrafted? He would have been highlighted probably, except for the fact that he had the 6th most targets out of everybody last season, and he wasn't even the starter until week, I think technically like 8, 9. Although he became the starter in week 6, still sharing with an injured but playing Zach Moss at that point. Then when we look down at the other two here, we got Ken Walker, David Montgomery going around the same area, and rightfully so, Ken Walker going ahead. And when you look at this, he had the 13th most targets last year. Now, that was only in 11 games, so there is a positive tip to that cap. But also, it is a new offensive coordinator in town. They are going to be passing less. That is for sure. I don't know for sure that this running attack is spectacular enough where Kenneth Gainwell might be taken a little bit too early in drafts. But nonetheless, he did do well as a receiver last year in terms of getting targets, and I think proved himself in that area of the game to some extent. That's going to bring us on to this next tier. Once again, when we talk about half PPR, full PPR, Alvin Kamara is actually quite probably a value because he's going roughly, around a lot of the other guys here in this same tier, right by Omarion Hampton. However, now Omarion Hampton, I would not call him some total receiving threat in LA. So, he doesn't get this same thing as Ashton Genty where I'm like, but, so for Alvin Kamara, he had the most targets last year. Now, also, new offensive coordinator in town, 1 year older. He's obviously has a decent amount of mileage on him at this point in his career, but he also still looked very, very good last year. So there is a potential upside to where you're getting Alvin Kamara in drafts. Once again, most specifically for full PPR compared to the other scoring formats. And then at the bottom here, we also have Tony Pollard showing himself as a value, going significantly behind some of these other guys. And when you look at the floor, it's actually quite good, even better than the rest of the other guys in this tier for the floor. The ceiling in this rushing floor, however, touchdown upside in Tennessee isn't the highest because there's, of course, concerns about how good that offense will actually be with the rookie quarterback. But when you look at DeAndre Swift and Tony Pollard, both of them also provide you some receiving upside for sure. I would say RJ Harvey also does as well. And that's why I don't have a big difference between Omarion Hampton and RJ Harvey in my rankings. But RJ Harvey, I don't know, does he have a bigger threat to his carries than Omarion Hampton does in Najee Harris? RJ Harvey with J.K. Dobbins there. Pretty similar situations, full PPR. I think the upside of RJ Harvey is actually a little bit higher in some senses. But nonetheless, what we really care about here, Tony Pollard. I said I wouldn't get into my... Well, I wasn't talking about my personal rank. Yeah, I was. Sorry, guys. Let's bring us on to the next tier here. Nick Chubb, Caleb Johnson, Tyrone Tracy Jr., and Brian Robinson Jr. And some of y'all are probably shocked that Nick Chubb makes it into this tier via the betting odds. And I assume this is in part, I don't know for sure, taking in some of the fact of Joe Mixon's concerns. But I also think that this might prove a little bit that Vegas also feels the same about me, that there is a role for Nick Chubb in this offense that he will have. And if something's wrong with Joe Mixon, if it's a repeat of a Christian McCaffrey situation from last year, which as of right now, it kind of looks like that, who knows where that ends up. Nick Chubb could end up being a very, very good value. Now, some of you will think he's washed, and I'm not going to try to convince you otherwise because you might be correct, and I don't want to be the one to have convinced you otherwise. Nonetheless, when you talk about a potential value that you can get at the very end of the draft, Nick Chubb is most definitely that. And I assume the longer this Joe Mixon thing goes on, the more that his ADP will creep up. But I assume because of how low it is right now and how close we are to draft time, that it's not going to creep up enough compared to the potential value that you might be able to get from him. Then we've got Caleb Johnson showing himself off as a bit of a concern here. We're taking him significantly ahead of Tyrone Tracy, Brian Robinson Jr. now. Significantly ahead of Tyrone Tracy Jr. does not bother me. Significantly ahead of Brian Robinson Jr. I would say one of them is out of whack, at least, between the two. But based on how I figured these things out, based on looking at the others, what stands out is that Caleb Johnson's getting taken significantly higher than everybody else in this tier. Once again, I don't really have a problem with where he's going, but I do think Brian Robinson Jr. should be going higher. Going to bring us on to Isaiah Pacheco, Tank Bigsby, and Jordan Mason in this next tier. And the odds are suggesting that Isaiah Pacheco might be a bit of a yellow flag, a bit of a concern with where he is going up here, ahead of Caleb Johnson, even, and all those other guys. And the floor for him, not incredibly fantastic, and the touchdown upside even worse, which led to this point total. So just slightly above average is Vegas's expectation for him, yet we're taking him, fairly a little bit higher than that, with more expectations than that, I think, in instances where we're drafting him. And you got to be a little bit concerned about that whole situation in Kansas City. There is a group of running backs. It seems like Kareem Hunt's still going to be involved. It's concerning. And then you also think of how he performed at the end of last year. Of course, there are excuses for that. And you look at the rest of this, Jordan Mason kind of right in the middle here, but Tank Bigsby showing himself off as a guy who maybe we're not taking high enough as a nice value. And with recent news coming out, I do expect his ADP to rise, but currently especially, and probably throughout the rest of the situation, unless something really, really becomes totally clear, Tank Bigsby seems to be a decent value for you to be able to get in your drafts. Going to be probably the first, second down guy in a true split situation with ETN. Also, probably the guy who gets the touchdown carries. Hopefully, if you're drafting him, he's the guy who's getting those more valuable carries more often. That's going to bring us on to this tier here. You're looking at Travion Henderson, Aaron Jones, Jalen Warren, Travis Etienne Jr., Najee Harris, Javonte Williams. Speaking of my rankings, Aaron Jones, I did move him down in my rankings some. I get it. It seems like he is going to be in a true split. I still appreciate his receiving upside here. 8th most targets last season, and I think that he will continue to remain to be maybe fewer carries, which is good between the tackles for him, good for his health for one, and also just good for his efficiency numbers, which will help to offset any less usage that he gets. But I also expect them to have a larger rushing attack overall, so that'll help to offset him getting a smaller percentage of carries as well too. And I don't really expect these passing numbers to go down, because J.J. McCarthy's most definitely going to be relying on him as he develops, especially early on in the season. So I think Aaron Jones is still a strong draft pick, but Vegas not too high up on, especially these touchdown totals. So a higher floor kind of guy with a little bit of spike thanks to those receiving numbers that help to also make him more consistent and safer. But Travion Henderson is the one that we should be concerned about here, and I don't disagree with that at all. The floor for him is actually half decent. The touchdown upside, terrible in that offense, and it makes sense. He's he's most likely going to have to break off big runs. So I think he's going to be an inconsistent player. I've been saying this all off season, that we might be drafting him a little bit too high, as much as I get it. I get the temptation. What I will say for him is I am willing to draft him high here, but it's for that potential upside that he's just a really, really, really good running back, kind of takes over the backfield, and it's just a little bit better than is most likely for him to be, is how we're drafting him. And it depends on the rest of my roster. I don't want him to be my RB1, my RB2, but if I'm scared about, uncertain about one of my first picks, if I took Christian McCaffrey, I might want to double down on taking another risk and take Travion Henderson, so that way if McCaffrey goes down, I have a guy who does have a significant ceiling for where you can get him in the drafts. At least I would say probably higher than Aaron Jones, though it's not like super likely that he's better than Aaron Jones this season. And then at the bottom of this tier, we've got Javonte Williams showing himself as a bit of a value. Vegas is saying, yeah, he's they're a little bit less concerned about his starting opportunity there, the opportunities that he'll get. And I think that we need to be realistic about it and acknowledge that. And Javonte Williams is somebody who I do find myself eyeing for several rounds before you really have to take him. So I'm in agreement here with that. That brings us on to our last tier, going to be Ramondre Stevenson, Tyjae Spears, Tyler Algier, Kareem Hunt, Zach Charbonnet, and Jaden Blute. Nice to see him at least sneak on in here, interestingly enough, and he didn't even have these lower betting numbers. Same with Tyjae Spears and Kareem Hunt. I still left him in this data because I do think that there is a reason that they don't have these betting lines, despite my potential for Jaden Blute. Nonetheless, when you look at this group, which ADPs stick out? That's Tyler Algier, Kareem Hunt. I feel much more comfortable with Tyler Algier than Kareem Hunt. I think Kareem Hunt just has a floor as the fact that he's going to be part of the game, but there are other running backs there, so even if there's an injury to Pacheco, I'm still not expecting Kareem Hunt to take all that, whereas Tyler Algier doesn't really have any other running back competition in Atlanta, so much more optimistic about that for fantasy purposes, but Vegas still saying both of them could be a value. And Zach Charbonnet, Vegas saying maybe you're drafting him a little bit too high, and this is one who I have pointed that out this offseason several times, so you loved to see confirmation. Without becoming the starter, and you don't want to project injuries, he's not incredibly useful. He is one of the better backup running backs, but for where we're drafting him, it's maybe a touch too high. Nothing crazy, but maybe a touch too high, Vegas says, and I don't disagree. Now, when we look at some players not on the list, of course, in the case of Joe Mixon, his ongoing injury saga, and for Quinshon Judkins, with the uncertainty with him, with off-field stuff and contract stuff, there is obviously no betting lines for them. But interestingly, for some of these next players, it didn't have any lines. Cam Scatterboot, J.K. Dobbins, Rashad White, Isaac Rendo, Bashal Tutin, Austin Eckler, Jerome Ford, Rico Dowdle, Ray Davis, Trey Benson, Braylon Allen, Jalen Wright, Dylan Sampson, Blake Corum, Roshan Johnson. So these were like the top 58 or so running backs, 59 probably, that I grabbed for this list, and those were ones who didn't have any numbers, or enough numbers at the very least, to be able to do anything with. I have varying opinions on some of those players that you may or may not be aware of, but this video isn't for that. Let's go on to looking at the tight ends and wrap this video up. Here we are with the tight end Vegas lines. So just like last video, here's the lines that I did, and I actually took from two sources because I didn't love one of the sources that I've been using for these. Some of the numbers stuck out to me as not being incredibly current for a few players, and I hope I pointed those out enough. So I pulled from two sources for this. So we have the receiving yards plus 1,000 betting odds, and the receiving yards over-unders from a different source. Some players didn't have numbers for both sources in some instances. Receiving touchdowns over-under, and then receiving touchdowns at 5+ betting odds. So it's still on a 14-point total scale because I just kind of like averaged these two the points that they got. 7-point scale, 4 points is going to be these white ones, and then 7 up here, 1 point down there, 0 points if you didn't get anything. But like in the instance of this, that you didn't get the average of 0. I didn't actually give them 0 points, just none, not even Not even significant. Players who didn't have enough betting numbers quickly: Isaiah Likely, Brenton Strange, Pat Fryermuth, Darren Waller, Dalton Schultz, Juwan Johnson, Elijah Arroyo, Jatavion Sanders, and Terrence Ferguson. Your top 33 or 32 tight ends, I believe, are here then. And yeah, just didn't have enough data, no touchdown numbers for a couple of these guys that it would have been nice to have that for, but unfortunately they did not make the cut here, actually. And you have to be concerned when they don't have these betting odds numbers as well, too, as a little bit of a yellow flag that they didn't even get a betting odd for receiving touchdowns of 5+. Vegas said, not even going to mess with that. Maybe it'll happen, but we don't really have a good beat on that. So when we look at George Kittle, he gets a perfect 14 points over here, and he actually shows himself as a bit of a value, because then when we go down, now what we don't have here, just like the wide receivers, is reception total. So half PPR, full PPR. We got to keep that in mind as well. Once again, not holistic data here that we have completely, but in the case of Brock Bowers, Trey McBride, obviously we expect them to have a lot of receptions, so I actually include them in the same tier as George Kittle, just as my rankings also have them in the same tier. But Vegas saying that George Kittle maybe should be taken closer to these two, or maybe the other two, in my opinion, should be taken closer to George Kittle a little bit further back. But nonetheless, if you're looking for a value and a really good tight end, George Kittle is your guy, and I'm in full agreement with that. Then I was happy to see Sam Laporta show up fourth on here. Of course, he's also in the same tier as all of these other guys, because he is one player where, although you take him later than these other guys fairly significantly, I don't like my rosters when I draft him, just because when I look at him, I'm like kind of concerned that it's just mediocre and that some of these other guys are going to do better than him, which the data suggests they might. But nonetheless, I was glad to see that overall, especially when you look at these touchdown numbers here for him, that Vegas is not, or betting odds, sportsbooks, these sportsbooks are not, too low on him either. Then David Njoku and Mark Andrews are the two that are going to be standing out here a little bit when you look at where you can get them compared to these points totals. So David Njoku being taken way significantly behind the other two, but when you look at the floor, actually a little bit higher in terms of the yards in both instances here compared to Sam Laporta. Touchdowns, a little bit lower, not significantly lower. So that's someone who has been somebody who I'm keeping my eyes on. I had concerns with Quinshon Judkins healthy or being their lead back and how much they were going to run. But I'm a little bit less concerned now, and Joe Flacco definitely has an eye for David Njoku if you want to start the season hot. And Mark Andrews is another one who does sneak into this tier thanks to his touchdowns, unreliable floor, so a lot like what you saw last year, potentially, but hopefully a little bit better. It's not always the most fun ride if it's going to be like last year's, for sure. And then Colston Loveland is a guy who is in his own tier here with 10 points, floating in between the others, and comes off as a value when you look at him. You can take him behind guys lower, Evan Ingram, TJ Hawkinson, and significantly behind all of these others, even though the betting lines aren't way too far off. And I love to see this because I do have Colston Loveland ahead of a guy like Tyler Warren. I am actually a little bit higher on him, oddly enough, despite my concerns for, generally speaking, for the Chicago players and where you're drafting them. It is what it is, but Vegas is saying there's a reason for that, and so could be a value. And he's another one where, I don't hate taking him. The only thing is I don't like taking two tight ends, and if I take Colston Loveland, I kind of probably want to take another tight end along with that, which that tight end would probably be Mason Taylor all the way down here. Then when we look at this next year, TJ Hawkinson, Tucker Kraft, is TJ Hawkinson being taken a little bit too high? Is Tucker Kraft being taken a little bit too low? Maybe both of those. So TJ Hawkinson, a little bit of a red flag, Tucker Kraft, a little bit of a green flag, highlighted in light purple there. Then we've got our next tier: Evan Ingram, Dallas Goedert, Hunter Henry, Tyler Warren, Zach Ertz. And given where we're drafting Evan Ingram compared to the rest of the guys, yellow flag for him. Somebody I did move down my tight end rankings a little bit, did just adjust those not too long ago today. And then Hunter Henry, Zach Ertz are showing as guys who maybe a little bit of a value. Now, the reason that I want to take chances on a Dalton Kincaid, a Kyle Pitts, even a Mason Taylor over those guys, generally speaking, is because we know that the ceiling for these guys is not high enough to matter. And at some point, I want to take a shot on a tight end who's actually going to have a significant top 7 number, which I don't think Hunter Henry, Zach Ertz really can provide you with that in most any world. But that's going to bring us on to this next tier. Dalton Kincaid, Kyle Pitts, Jake Ferguson. I actually had yellow flags on them originally, but I decided to take that off. I mean, it looks like we're kind of drafting them appropriately. Dalton Kincaid, somebody who I like to get at that point, feel pretty optimistic about the upside. Kyle Pitts, I think somebody we can't write off too much. So if any of them are a value in here, it's actually Kyle Pitts. If any of them are a yellow flag, it would have been Dalton Kincaid out of the bunch. Then when we look at this next, pretty much the last tier here, K-Dot, Chico Conquo, Mike Gesicki, and Mason Taylor making it into this tier. So you love to see that for my target. It has betting odds above some of these other guys. So Vegas, I guess, agreeing with me, of course, barely. But nonetheless, he has an opportunity to beat the number 3 target there for the New York Jets. Lower volume passing attack overall, but a tight end being the third receiver on their team or better is where you find gems. So I really like the opportunity for Mason Taylor. Chico Conquo is apparently being underdrafted. You know, nothing I'm trying hard to take a bet on or anything like that. Kate Otten maybe being a little bit overdrafted. Mike Gesicki maybe being a little bit overdrafted. Nothing too concerning in general here. And then Theo Johnson makes the cut, got some numbers, according to the same source that gave numbers to Mason Taylor. So, that's somebody too, if you want to take a chance. He's also somebody who could be one of the higher receiving getters. I'm just not a big believer in the talent of Theo Johnson. That is it for the running backs and the tight ends. Thank you so much for tuning on in. If you liked the video, like, comment, subscribe. That is highly appreciated. Don't forget, if you missed it, because I released it at a weird time and it did not take off, wide receivers, quarterbacks video, same thing, but better, I think, in my opinion. Really good information in that video, so go check that out if you're interested. Thank you very much. Hope to see you Tuesday and Thursday. Bye-bye.